It's all on your shoulders now. You've got to make the entire match. Today, let's make sure you've got the tools to do it right. I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. If you are passionate about the craft of professional wrestling and you're never done learning all about it, then you have landed in the exact right place. What are you waiting for? Go ahead, join the Till We Make It tribe, subscribe right now, and enable notifications so you never miss a video. Sometimes we are tasked with putting an entire match together by ourselves. And like we talked about in last week's video, generally speaking, the creation of a match is a collaboration. It's a creative dialogue. Rarely is it just a monologue. So why might you be asked to put an entire match together on your own? There are several reasons this could happen. For example, maybe the person you are working with has an in-ring promo earlier on the lineup, and all of their focus needs to be on getting that exactly right. And in that case, you are tasked with putting the entire match together while they are preoccupied. Maybe your opponent for the night is working a double shot, and they're only anticipated to arrive at the building from their prior commitment a few minutes before you are meant to go to the ring. And in that case, you're going to be the person putting the whole thing together. Quite a few years back, I was lucky enough to share the ring with my in-ring hero, Jushin Thunder Liger. And on that particular day, he asked me to put the whole match together. He told me for years he was always the guy that put the match together, and he was tired of the responsibility. And when the guy I've idolized for decades asked that favor of me, of course, I obliged him. There's a ton of reasons why you might find yourself in this exact scenario. And when it does happen, here's how you're going to handle it. First things first, make sure you know the time of the match and the finish. If it's not on the lineup, try to obtain that information from either an agent or a member of the creative team. But don't worry, if for some extraneous reason that information is not available to you, we can still do the work. You do not need to know the exact finish of your match to put everything else together. Up second, assume 3-act structure. For the vast majority of wrestlers trained in the Western Hemisphere, 3-act structure is the default anyway. And in your experience working for this organization, are you typically a face or a heel? Use that information to make an educated guess about the face-heel dynamic for this match you're going to put together. And before I get any further into this, would you please leave a like-a-palooza on today's video? It helps the channel to continue to grow. 10,000 subscribers strong so far, and that's thanks to you. The third thing I want you to do is to populate your half of the match structure with moves and spots that you have confidence in. Sprinkle in those greatest hits that you've been testing on the road. For a more depth explanation on how to develop your own greatest hits, stay tuned for that 7 keys to becoming a better performer plug that you know is coming at the end of today's video. But go ahead and populate your half of the match structure with the spots you have supreme confidence in. Step 4. If you know your opponent well because you've worked together plenty of times in the past, or maybe you've been studying up on them in the weeks leading up to this match, start to sketch in their favorite spots where they tend to be deployed in the match. If you've been studying them, no doubt you've started to notice those trends and patterns. You've got some greatest hits, I'm betting, so do they. So what's the spot they always like to use last in their shine? Or what's the spot that changes an active heat into a stalking heat for them? If you know some of their greatest hits, sketch them into the structure. And I am saying sketch for a reason. None of this is written in ink, so to speak. You're just sketching out the match so you are ready. But when the actual time comes, when you have those few scant minutes to sit down, knees to knees in the locker room with the person you're going to share the ring with, you might present this sketch that you've come up with and they're going to want to take a few things out and put a couple other things in. That's just part of the process. But if you've been asked to put the match together, you want to do your best to have the most complete sketch possible ready. And if the person that you are working with literally has no time or no desire to tinker with anything you've come up with, well, guess what? That sketch is going to graduate into the exact match you're going to be performing in the ring. But it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes you'll sit down with your opponent and they're going to want to make a few edits. I'm calling on my own experience here, and I'll share with you a story from my own career. Back in 2019, when I was doing my 25th anniversary tour, I got to wrestle all over the world in a bunch of my favorite places against some of my favorite opponents and against some opponents I had always wished I had a chance to share the ring with. And through the course of doing this, I would occasionally be in a position where my opponent would end up sketching out the match for me in advance. And on more than one occasion, maybe they had just watched a match of mine from 2006, and they saw something in that match that they really liked, and they sketched it in for me. But the reality is, what I was doing back in 2006 was worlds apart from what I was doing in 2019. And while it was very flattering that they were a fan of something I used to do, or that they had taken the time to study my past work, those things ended up being edited. Nevertheless, I was certainly very appreciative of the fact that they had sketched something in for me, even though we didn't end up using it. Your goal here is to fill in as many of the blanks as possible before you actually sit down with your opponent. Call on your knowledge of 3-act structure and your understanding of what the face-heel dynamic is likely to be. And if you have the time of the match and the finish available to you, that's great. You can factor all of that in. But if you don't have that available to you, you want to create something with lots of wiggle room in it. A basic concept that could play at 6 minutes just as easily as it could be stretched out to 16 minutes. And the easiest part of the match to build in this wiggle room is Act 2. It's gonna be in the heat. While sketching out Act 2, come up with a few extra hope spots and a second obstacle that could be introduced into the story of the match that would warrant a second heat. If the time of the match ends up being rather short, this additional material can be jettisoned at a moment's notice. But if you end up needing it, you will be so thankful you took the time to come up with all of it in advance. This is also extremely helpful if the amount of time you're going to have with your opponent before you head to Gorilla is extremely short. You don't want to be stuck needing to create material at the last minute, because those 11th hour inventions are rarely, if ever, our best stuff. And last, if you still don't know the finish and you've come up with everything else you need for your sketch, come up with 2 finishes. One in which you go over, the other in which you go under. And then work backwards from those finishes all the way through your structure and look for anything that no longer makes sense in light of the choice that you made. So for example, let's say that you designed a match in which you spent the entire second act working over your opponent's left shoulder, but then the finish is you going over with an ankle lock. Something in that story doesn't add up. Why work over the shoulder if you're going home on the ankle? Work backwards, making any modifications that need to be done so the story becomes congruent. Once you've worked your way through this entire process, including correcting any missteps in the psychology of the match that build to a satisfying finish, you want to start calling the match back to yourself over and over again until you could explain it to someone else without hesitation and without making any mistakes. Because you might only get one chance if the amount of time you'll have with your opponent is extremely short. And eventually, your opponent will show up and you're going to have to talk about what you've sketched out. And eventually, you will find out the time and the finish of the match, which will add a few points of permanence into your work. Through the decades, I have been fortunate enough to wrestle maybe 2,500 matches, give or take. And I have been the person putting the entire match together more times than I can count. And the reverse of that is also true. On days when I'm being pulled 50 different directions with different responsibilities backstage, I have absolutely turned to my opponent and said something like, "Could you put the whole match together for me? Just leave me a spot at the end of the shine and one in the middle to plug in, and you do the rest." When I come back to that person later on to find they have a completed sketch ready for me to just plug my spots into and walk to the ring, I feel like I've been accommodated by a working pro. And I can walk to the ring with confidence, knowing I'll be doing the dance with a true professional. You remember that plug for 7 keys that I foreshadowed earlier in today's video? It's time we pull the trigger on that Chekhov's gun. 7 Keys to Becoming a Better Performer is a book I wrote for fellow pro wrestlers just a few summers back. And I have watched as its message becomes more and more relevant with each passing year. You can grab a print copy through Amazon.com, they'll mail it right to you, or a digital copy that hits your mobile device in a matter of seconds. And over on Audible, that's Amazon's audiobook company, there's an audiobook version which I narrate myself. Grab one today. Take your education to the next level by joining our community over on Patreon. If you want to join this patron roll call that you see on the right side of your screen, well, follow the link down below in the descriptus or the one appearing on screen right now that kind of looks like a letter P. And if you have a PayPal account or a credit card, you can join us for as little as $5 a month. We would love to have you.